And we're live, I believe. Now we're live. Great. So, hi guys, and welcome back to Brain-Friendly Thinking. As we're waiting for people to pour in, if anybody will be watching, I just briefly review what happened last week on the show. Last week I worked a lot with the zettels from my Zettelkasten. There are only a couple of them here that I want to work with this time, and I grouped them into different groups. I also started to think about what I call the architecture. So this is essentially, we're still dealing with touch sensation. Although eventually it should ideally also encompass other types of perception. But for now I keep it at touch sensation. And I actually used several CaGas last time. We talked about how the individual receptor cells are organized in the skin. These different lines here, they represent skin location, the little circles represent the cells, and then they connect to other cells. So these are axons, these are other axons, these are the nerve cells. This is what the whole thing looks like on the skin, as in which part of the skin activates which receptor. That's a very crudely drawn brain, and then I had these funny boxes here with arrows, which are very schematic, very schematic form of a CaGa. That's what we did last week, before I forget it or before anybody switches off. Just as an information, next week there won't be a live stream because I'll be away, but the week after we will resume, and then I will actually move this to Saturday, 5 o'clock Central European time. So that should currently be 17 minus 6 is 11. That should be 11 o'clock Eastern time, or East Coast time. I think you call it Eastern time, right? So that will be from in 2 weeks time, and that's what we did last time. Let me switch back to the talking head view, and now that people had time to join, if they want to join, I will continue with my exploration. Just as a quick reminder, again, this is about really me thinking through a more complicated topic. In this case, I'm thinking through a perception, primarily in the hand, and I'm trying to develop a framework, I'm trying to develop a model that ideally in the future can also be used to simulate certain behavior, and then you can test that. Oh yeah, that's actually one thing that I should quickly mention, and I should ideally not. Okay, I should ideally not throw around the camera. At the very end, I sort of worked out a research program. I said first we want to consolidate, or I want to consolidate the functional model, then simulate the model, assign functions to physical modules in the brain, so to physical entities, and finally design new experiments. And today I'm going to continue with step one, start with step one, consolidate the functional model or architecture. What I've drawn here last time is actually very close to what I had drawn before. I said we start with the physical deformation of the skin, this gets translated, conducted, summed, translated again, encoded, and so on and so forth. So that would be everything here. But what I would really like to do now is to have a look at some of these models here. and see how we can unify them. I briefly talked about this last time, but these are from different research groups. Some of them are a bit older. This one here is from 2015. This one is from 2017, and this one is from 2022. And just in case you wonder how I can remember that, if I... Oh, you can't quite see it. Right, this is basically the citation where this is from. This is the key that maps to my reference manager, and as part of the key I also have the publication here, so that's how I know it. Great, is that still in focus? Not quite. That should about be focused now, I guess. I hope. Yeah, good. So, they already, as always, science is all about building on what has come before, so I'm not starting from zero. Let's have a look at their models, and especially let's have a look at the things that these models have in common. So if I'm trying to create a unified model, then I want to just change this. If I create a unified model, I want to build on those, and ideally I want to translate all of those three into one model, into one CaGa. Good. So the first one is from a guy called Matthew Longo and colleagues. They have different functional components, and by the way, these are all functional models. They won't tell us where they are located in the brain or along the processing pathway. Although the people in this paper here, they actually start to speculate where they might be located. But right now we're only focusing on the functional part. Okay, let's take this into the focus. Longo. They have different functional components. First of all, we have the tactile efferents, the one that actually relate the information from the skin to the brain. If you want to know where you've been touched, you can imagine that information is quite crucial, because if that's missing, the brain won't register any touch. But they say that's not enough. They say you also need other information. Specifically, you need proprioceptive information. Proprioception means, proprio means self. So proprioception is the perception of your own body. It is the perception of how much your muscles are tense or relaxed, of the angle of your joints, and so on and so forth. All of that counts as proprioception. And they say in order to actually use that information that comes from the skin, we also need to know what is the state of our body. Are my fingers currently curled? Are they extended? Am I making a fist? Are they with the palm on the table? Are they with the back of the hand on the table? And so on and so forth. And there's of course much more information, as you can imagine. They say we also need all of that information, and then we need the efferent command. So we have efferents with A in front, and we have efferents with E. Efferent is any information that comes towards the brain, and efferent is the information that goes away from the brain. And essentially, I not only need the information where is my hand, or where is, in which location, what is the state of the individual receptors within the joints, within the muscles, and so on and so forth, but also what is what did I actually want to do? Because you can imagine that there's some obstacle, like my right hand here, and if the right hand wasn't there, I would want like to move my finger to that position, but because my hand is in the way, I can't. And so I need the information of what I wanted to do, and then I need the information of what my proprioceptors are actually telling me. And that information needs to be combined. We see these arrows here. Oh, and this is very important. They cluster those functions. These are the inputs. So the information from the receptors in my joints, in my muscles, and so on and so forth get combined with the information of how I actually wanted to move my hand in this case into something they call the postural schema. So there's already some summation or some other form of information integration going on. Whereas the tactile efferents, that are the perceptors again, that notice the touch, they also need to be processed in some way. They call it the superficial schema. And then we also have an intrinsic model of how our body is shaped. Usually we don't think about this, but we have a model that tells us how long our fingers are, for instance, how wide our fingers are. There are certain conditions where people suddenly believe that one of their body parts is either missing. Sometimes they think they have an additional body part that isn't there, or very often where they feel that their body parts are deformed, even though nothing happened to their body parts. They are as they always used to be, but they think they have been deformed, and this can be a permanent state, and this can also be what we call transient. Transient means it's not permanent. Essentially, it's just for a certain time, and then it goes away again. And there are some very clever experiments with which this type of distortion feeling can be invoked, but once the experiment is over, everything feels normal again. But yeah, it's definitely possible. Like there was one experiment I remember where I think they used VR for that. So they had VR goggles and they artificially inflated the hand, and then the people started trying to touch that and just to make sure, is my finger really longer than it used to be? So we actually have this model of the body size and shape inside, and if we combine this with the information with the postural information, we then get a model of how our where our body parts are in space, essentially. And so I know that if I feel a touch here, by the way, at this point there is not yet any information from touch, but once this information from touch is added, if my index finger is touched, then, and let's say my hand is here, I want to feel what touches me, I know how, or my brain can work out how my hand needs to move in order to touch the tip of my index finger. For that it needs the spatial, what they call a spatial localization of the body. And that needs to be combined with the actual tactile information. So they call this a superficial schema, where that tactile information is encoded, and from that we get the spatial localization of touch. But they think there is also something like a somatic localization of touch. And by the way, you see that there is a little a here. That means that I have another zettel for that. Let me let me actually try to find that zettel. So what is the, this is 1.3b1a, 1a slash bing the G, bing the ja, that's not here. No. This is E. Ah. Where is that? Where is that? That's not the right thing either. Thank you. Just a moment. Hey. Where's that information gone? It isn't here either. That's a tad odd. Bing. There is something missing. Ah, there we go. There we go. Just a moment. Actually, let me do it like that. That is better to watch. Sorry. I just took a moment to locate the zettel. That's part of working with the physical Zettelkasten. And where is it? It's here. I just want to know what I wrote down. Cool. So here with this somatic localization of touch, I have the little a that tells me there is another zettel specifically that comments on this part here. And it's this zettel. You can see this zettel is 1.3, I don't know whether you can read it, but it's 1.3b1a slash, and then we have two Chinese characters, bing the, simply because I wanted to practice my Chinese characters. And this one here, it's exactly the same, 1.3b1a slash, and the two Chinese characters, bing the, and the a. So this, where is it? This refers to this little thing here. And what does it actually say? Touch localization can be explained. That doesn't make any sense. No, it does. Okay, great. Okay, these two belong together. Yeah, then it makes sense. Touch localization can be explained by multilateralization of body landmarks. Okay, great. We're getting to that anyway. So I'm not gonna go into any more details right now, but this essentially links these two together. This one has a capital A after the lowercase a, so because you can see there is a capital A here, and that means in the Zettelkasten that is the order in which they go. First this, and then once I read this paper here, oops, that's the wrong order, that's the order in which they go. First I read this paper and created that zettel, and sometime later I read another paper that had another model. I wrote about this model. I thought it fits to this zettel. I connected them, and then because I wanted to have the model on its own zettel so that I can draw it nice and big, and I can also write a lot of text explaining it, I distributed that over two zettels. But we will be getting back to this later. So far for the model by Longo. Now I have another model by a guy called Head, whose first name currently escapes me. But this Longo is in London and Head is in Salzburg, somewhere in Austria. And that is another type of model which on the surface looks sort of similar to the first one, but also slightly different. So let me walk through this and then compare how do they differ and how are they the same. Okay, here we have the skin location. Actually, I should maybe do it like that, then it's much nicer to see. The skin location, again, this is where I've been touched on the skin. And we also have the posture. That means where am I located in space. These two informations are the information from these two sources are combined. But at the same time, the posture information, where is my hand located in space, is also combined with visual information. That means when I'm looking at my body, in this case when I'm looking at my hand, how does it look like where it's located in space? And that changes whether I'm looking like from a little bit, at the moment I'm looking like this is the angle to look at my hand. You can imagine if I'm going over it, now it's dropping directly down. I can look from the side, then the angle is different, and the body, in this case the hand, will look slightly different every time. Usually our brain, or the conscious part, the part we noticing consciously, accommodates for that, and we don't notice that it's looking different every time, but the information is still there and brain can use it. So the posture information, that means, and either they don't say it or I didn't write it down. What did I say? E.g. hand and arm posture. So this would actually be purely, I guess, I'm already starting to compare the two, which is great. So I think that this posture information here is probably what Longo and colleagues call spatial localization of body. So it should definitely combine proprioceptive afferents. It should combine the commands that the brain gives out, and it should also use the model of size and shape, at least according to the model by Longo. Of course, it might be different, but there would be something missing here. Anyway, this postural information is also combined with visual information, and this gives us different reference frames. And then that information is passed still further into an integration stage. Integration of different reference frames, including tactile remapped and non-remapped reference frames. So that means the information, the touch information, also the visual information, if we look at the hand, if we're blindfolded or if we're really blind, then of course that information is not there. But the tactile information, the visual information, according to this model, is passed on directly to another functional area, and also in a, I want to say combined form, but that doesn't really capture it, in a, let's call that maybe a processed form. There's also will be some processing here, pre-processing, but more heavily processing. So in a only slightly pre-processed form, in a more heavily processed and fused form. All of that is added together, and from that, this is actually how we know where we've been touched, and then this interacts with the function that works out the action that we should take, and there is a feedback loop here. Information is passed forward but also flows back, whereas in the other ones, according to both models, by the way, according to both models, it is what is called a feed-forward loop. I don't know why they call it feed-forward loop, because there's nothing looping back, but that's what's being used in the literature. Essentially, it just flows in one direction for both of them, and then here some information flows back again. And you can imagine there will be some information from other parts of the brain that will also be transferred here. So already we see some similarities that I will try to start to sketch. We do have that tactile information, of course. Just here we have the afferents, and then they are somehow integrated into superficial schema, whereas here they don't seem to make any statement as to whether this is the case or not, which means I could say that the skin location is the superficial schema, and then draw tactile afferents in front of that. And the way I'm going to, yeah, let's say, how should I best do that? We have the tactile afferents. Let's just use that word for now. I can always think of a better word later on. Tactile, can you read this? Sort of. Okay, I think I'm getting slightly better. I'm writing things slightly larger. Good, and I draw a box around that, which simply means this is one function. Great. Great. And then we have the skin location. I will use the term superficial schema. Superficial schema. Great. That is another function, even though both tactile afferents and superficial schema are actually nouns. At some point I would like to replace them with verbs, or even better, short phrases that tell you what exactly they do. Maybe superficial schema would be encode touch or something like that. We shall see. And that would correspond to, and now I'm going to categorize that. I'm categorizing that, grouping that, and just to make sure from my current understanding, at some point I will reread the papers again to make sure this is true, but from my memory and from what I've written down, this should correspond to skin location. Apologies for writing this smaller again. Cool. So we're comparing them. These two seem to correspond to this one. And as I noted before, the posture one seems to essentially encompass all of that thing here. Good. So let me draw that as well. What do we need? We start with the proprioceptive. Proprioceptive afferents. Great. So proprioceptive afferents, and we have the efferent commands. Efferent commands. Oops, and I just noticed I forgot to draw an arrow here. Right. Let's draw a box around this as well. These are also functions. or at least inputs, and then they get fused, probably fused and processed at the same time, into a postural schema. Oops, and I think I wrote this slightly smaller again. Great, so the proprioceptive efferents, the signals going towards the brain as well as the efferent commands, the signals flowing away from the brain, they are fused and combined and processed into postural schema. Then we are here, and we said we wanted to combine all of that into the posture. So that means, let's actually draw that at the same height as the postural schema. So model of body size and shape, I just call this body model for now. Which, by the way, as I noted, is not static, so technically this is also a function, which I don't know, there should be some inputs for that body model as well. Okay, but right now, just from the information I get from those, I don't have the information, so, and now spatial localization of body. No, actually, hang on. This is okay. No, it is okay. Spatial localization of body. Yes. Spatial localization of body. Great. That's another function. That's another function. And it combines information from the postural schema and also from the body model. So let me draw it like that. And all of that corresponds to posture here, at least roughly. So let me draw another box with dashed lines. If I can draw. Right. Great. Oops, I didn't draw that far enough. Something like that. And that corresponds to posture, I think. And I write this a little bit smaller again. Great. So now, yes, the last thing is actually this spatial localization of touch. And this is where the models start to differ. This is where they really start to differ. Because for this model here, combining the information from these two functions, larger functions, this is where spatial localization of touch ends. Whereas for this model, it is just one step in a... It's just one more step, but it's not the final step. Because visual information gets processed as well. So let me move that up here. Otherwise it might fall off, sorry. I will put it back into view in a moment. I just need to know, how do I call this? Do I call this spatial localization of touch? Do I call it external reference frame? Or do I actually say this? Oh, sorry, I'm still thinking. I'm still thinking, do I actually say that this whole box here corresponds to all of that here, up to here? I'm almost tempted to do that. I'm almost tempted to do that. Yeah, let's flip that around. Okay. So then I use the term external reference frame, and I need to unify all of them later, but that comes at a later stage. Don't try to do everything at once. Cool. So I need this box here and that box. Let me write it somewhere here then. External reference frame. Oops. I didn't write this quite big enough. Okay. External reference frame, and I got an input from the superficial schema and from the spatial localization of body. Great. So that is this part here. And then, oh yeah, we need the visual information. So I just used that term now. I need to unify. We can't write visual. I need to unify the terminology later. Visual information. Why didn't I write it one on top of the other? Who knows? Great, visual information. And now we need a hand-centered reference frame. So we have hand-centered reference frame. Let me put a box around that. And where does it get the information? It gets the information from, they call it posture, so since all of that is posture, the last box in here is spatial localization of body. So I again draw this, and then visual information. Wonderful. Great. So hand-centered reference frame, and then we have the integration of different reference frame, including tactile remapped and non-remapped reference frames. Which would mean yeah, let's just call this reference frame integration. And now let's do it like this. Reference frame integration. Good. I put a box around that. And where does the information come from? It comes from the external reference frame, the hand-centered reference frame, the visual reference frame and also again from the superficial schema. Good. And now I can put another box around that. Chuk, 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 chuk. So this is grouping. Zip, 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 zip. And now all of that would correspond to spatial localization of touch. Spatial localization of touch. Great, wonderful. We do have the feedback loop with the action here, and we do have the somatic localization of touch here, which are, let me add them. So action towards tactile stimulus. They would technically not be part of that. They would technically not be part of that model specifically. That would be sort of like, would be something external, but still. So this is action towards let's just call it touch, and then the other one is and the somatic localization of touch, which is, according to Longo and colleagues, different from the spatial localization of touch. Okay, so I will draw it somewhere here. Somatic touch localization. Awesome. Awesome, and now I can draw this. Oh, I should also draw a box around the actions, and then there would be a feedback loop between reference frame integration and action towards touch. Good, and with this thing here, this combines these two things. And what I've gained now by doing that, I can, first of all, I started to think about how are they the same and how are they different, but also I can actually start to question my understanding. And I think I made some decisions which are not ideal, let's put it that way. And sorry that I dive deep, but I want to get more colors. Let's give me the color red. Let's give me the color red. Like all of these inputs here, I did put them into one box because I think, or was thinking, that what Longo and colleagues split up into tactile efference and superficial schema, this is what should correspond to skin location in the head paper. Now this might be true, but it isn't ideal for the model I want to develop. And I think I do like the grouping that Longo and colleagues have done, where they have inputs, body representation, and then something that they seem not to have grouped anymore for whatever reason. So I think I would like to do something similar, and I'm using red to mark that. This will look very messy now, or start to look very messy now, but that's not a problem because it's just a thinking document. It's not a document for production. So I will draw in another layer that I would like to use. Oh, I'm almost running out of color for this pen. Let me wait. Let me work around those boxes because they don't belong to that. And here we have great, something like that. Here we have an input layer. Awesome. Up. And the inputs, they can already be pre-processed. So let me write inputs here. Do you still see that? No, you don't. I actually don't. Let's not write it on the right. Let's write it on the left where you can see it. Opala. Inputs. Great. So this is the input layer. That's slightly different from what I thought before. You can sort of almost see it. It's still called tactile efference here, proprioceptive efference, efferent commands and visual information. I think I should call this tactile information, proprioceptive information. I guess efferent command information, something like that. Good. This is one category. Now, do I go with what did Longo and colleagues use? They used body representation for all of that. That would be the superficial schema, the postural schema, the body model, but not the spatial localization of body. The question is, I actually really like that these two boxes here are separate. And I can see why they group them together, but I think I don't want to group them together for my model. Maybe I will in the future, but not for now. For that I actually like that they have the box posture around here. So I essentially from this box posture I would only take out the proprioceptive information and the information about the efferent commands and leave the rest in the posture. Just logically. I do wonder though whether there are any more inputs for the body model, or whether we need to worry about this. We don't necessarily need to worry about this. We could move the body model to the input layer as well. Decisions, always decisions. Great. Okay, but this, if I go back to what I've done last time, last time I had a very linear model, and this now already looks quite a bit better, as you would imagine, although I should say that this model here contains some elements that are no longer contained in this model, because technically this encoding here, and this is another comparison, this encoding here, can you read this? Yeah. I think this should probably correspond to the superficial schema here. Although I'm not sure, maybe there are two different steps. It's something to think about. Something to think about. Let me now go to the third model. And that one looks completely different from the other two. We also have tactile inputs, that would be the tactile efferents. We have somatotopic encoding, which would either correspond to the superficial schema or it would correspond to this encoding, depending on whether encoding and superficial schema are the same thing or they are different things. But at any rate, we have encoding, and then we have what they call landmark transformation. And this this is actually nice. This landmark transformation, I think this should correspond to this external reference frame. Probably, maybe, potentially. Because essentially what that means is the body now tries to work out, according to the model, how far away is what I've encoded here from a major landmark of my body, like a permanent crease of the finger. That would be a landmark because it's a joint. Here's another landmark, here's another landmark. The wrist would be a landmark. Probably, not probably, actually quite definitely the end of the finger, the sort of the skin would also be a landmark. And then we have signal integration. So if I'm not altogether completely mistaken, where did I put my colors? Let me use a different color for that to stay organized. If I'm not altogether completely mistaken, let me use this color here. That model, now it's really starting to get messy, would actually encompass exactly this part of the other models. And I think it would have the reference in frame integration as well, which tells me something. It tells me that potentially this model is not fine-grained enough yet. But let me dots everything here. Good. Good, and I just gonna write Miller et al. Oops, et al, that's just one, should just be just one L, but whatever. Okay. Great. Right. But according to that model, we don't need necessarily visual information. And that's why I say potentially this is not fine-grained enough. Potentially there are several steps. Maybe, I don't know. And this is actually something we will try to deduce later from the literature that already exists. And this is definitely something that can be tested later on. But maybe, potentially, there is a first step where this external reference frame information is unified, and then that information is handed over to another instance that unifies all of the other information, or potentially this signal integration step here, that actually not only takes into account this that information from what they call the landmark transformation, but also additionally takes information, touch information directly, and visual information as well, and from other reference frame information, and maybe that all combines there. Who knows? Who knows? But I think I'm not altogether displeased with where we got to. I think this is exactly what I wanted to do today, starting to integrate them. And there are lots of questions. Question time. Let's write down the questions, because these are questions that need to be clarified. First question. Several questions. First question. Can you read this? Yes, you can. Is assignment longo head correct? And what I mean by that is my understanding of the model really correct? If it is correct, then I think this grouping that I've done, that I essentially, where are we? Yeah. No, not here. Got too much stuff going on. That I essentially opened up this box they call posture and put everything inside that came from the longer model, like I've done here. Is that correct? Yes or no? And also that I took all the boxes that are in here and put them into the spatial localization of touch box from Longo, so the head thing into the Longo. Is that correct? Right now, I think it is, but I will need to reread some of the papers to make sure. This is just from, is that what the papers claim? Even if it's not what the papers claim, even if there is some mismatch between them, it might still be what I might be going with and say, that's what these authors think, but on reflection, I think it should be rather like this. I don't know, or I completely misunderstood something and say, okay, I have to change it. That's fine. That's thinking. That's just the way it is. Okay, this is the first question. What other questions can we derive from that model? The second one is, how many integration steps are there? What do I mean by that? Very simply, when I talked about the model by Miller et al., I was unsure about the signal integration. Does this signal integration correspond with the reference frame integration of head? Or is that a step in between the external reference frame and the reference frame integration? And this is actually something I don't think I can get from the from rereading the papers alone. I will need to combine this with other information and try to work things out. The third question is, what is the somatic touch localization? Yeah. Sorry, what is the somatic touch localization? The reason why I'm asking that, so this is something that Longo and colleagues will have definitely written in their paper. I know that it's supposed to be information about about where you've been touched, where you don't need postural information. And I think their argument is that there are some other elements that need this information without the postural information, or that can use that information. I don't know whether this is true, but I first want to really understand what they said, so I need to reread this again. It could be, and this is just some idea I'm getting now, that rather than being on its own, it might actually be in this arrow here, that there is another processing step before it's integrated with the postural information. And that this one can be called somatic touch localization. I don't know. We shall see. And then the last question I have for now, I think, is how can I say this? I want to say, how is this supported by evidence? Or let's say, how does this fit with experimental evidence. How does that fit with experimental evidence? And for that I have a whole, where are we? I think it's here. Yeah, I have a whole stack of zettels that I can actually try to say, well, could this model support what we're seeing in experiments, yes or no? That's definitely something that needs to be done. That is something that needs to be done. Not today, but it needs to be done. Good. Good. I think this is coming along. It's slow progress, of course, but that's to be expected. What do I have here on this Zettel? How many more minutes do I have? Oh, I'm already over the hour. Yes, okay, so this is, I'm just skimming that, and I think it just says what I already said about this model here, so I don't need to read this out to you right now, maybe in the future, but I'm actually quite pleased at where I leave off today. This is starting to come together. It's only the first step. It's not yet in any shape that it can be used, but it can. We have concrete questions that I can follow up later, which is great. That's exactly what you want. Clarity of mind. That's why this is so powerful. And then, yeah, we're gonna take it from there step by step. Let me switch back to talking head. So, sorry, I'm just gonna drink something. Today it seems we didn't have a lot of people watching, which is absolutely fine. According to the information by OBS, there's currently one person watching. Maybe there are more that I don't see. If anybody has any questions right now, now would be the time to ask them. One thing before we finish this up, or I finish this up, is again, please note that next week there won't be a live stream, and for the week after that I will actually move this live stream from Sunday noon Central European time to Saturday 5 p.m. Central European time. There's several reasons for that. First of all, it's giving me my Sunday off, so I can do other things, visit other people or locations or whatever. Secondly, it will be easier for people who are joining me from the US, which is currently, I believe, the majority of my subscribers. Apologies to you guys that you haven't been able to catch me live, because it's probably way too early for you in the US. But yeah, in 2 weeks time, next week there won't be a live stream, but in 2 weeks time I will move it to 5 p.m. on Saturdays. That should be 11 a.m. Eastern time, if I've done the math correctly. And then you can join. If you join me from Australia or Japan or somewhere there, then this might be in the middle of the night for you now. That's the problem with trying to accommodate everybody. But yeah, in general, I think it might be a good idea. Okay, so that's where we leave it for today. I started to integrate the models. It's coming along great, and I have a couple of questions I can follow up on during the next couple of live streams, and then little by little I will develop this framework or this model to a point that it's actually useful. Right now it's not quite useful. Right now it's only trying to structure in my head what other people have said. But yeah, that's it for today, unless anybody has any question. And this doesn't seem to be the case, at least I don't see anything in the chat. So, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please don't forget to give the like button a high five. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And until next time, keep thinking.